AM560theanswer.com, on the AM560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Did you see this? University of Chicago Education Lab's survey of Chicago public schools found 38% of 9th through 11th grade girls exhibited signs of PTSD. So freshmen to juniors, 2 in 5 exhibited signs of PTSD. That's double the rate experienced by military service members returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, which is why I question the measurement to some extent, and I question the COVID lockdown policies to another.
Yeah, I was thinking COVID policies, and also, living on the streets is rough. I mean, there's
Well,
a lot
that
of
too.
violence around us. Yes.
Well, that too. And, I mean, we know what the stats are in terms of the reading and math scores in CPS. And frankly, throughout Chicagoland, those great suburban schools that are not great anymore. I'm talking to you, North Shore, Naperville, Oak Park River Forest, Barrington. I'm talking to you. Downers Grove, Elmhurst. Shall I continue? I'm talking to you in the suburbs. Schools that are living off reputations that no longer reflect their performance. And it's all right there in black and white. Erin Geary wrote about the literacy plan the state has cobbled together. This should be good for some chuckles. And she wrote about it at johncastnews.com. Very good piece breaking it down. Erin Geary is a writer, consultant, mother, wife, and volunteer. Commonfolk365.substack.com is her Substack. And her piece at johncastnews.com, Being Literate is True Freedom. Erin Geary, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the ISBE literacy plan.
Well, it really doesn't focus too much on the student. It's focusing more on monies that can be spent in other ways, which is non-educational. Johnson's plans are more about student guide school decisions from youth councils, securing low-income housing, providing free college tuition for those who decide to become teachers, equitable access to education for illegal immigrants. Where he's coming up with the money for these?
Yeah, but that's Brandon Johnson in Chicago. I've given up on Chicago. I'm thinking about this more globally. It's an Illinois State Board of Education plan, and so that necessarily implicates suburban schools and exurban schools. So that aspect of this plan.
Well, Illinois is notorious for spending monies in areas that they shouldn't be spending monies on. They just came out, if you want to talk about how public schools in general, but Chicago in particular, sorry, I keep going back to Chicago, did a study that started under Rahm Emanuel saying that the principals who were given more freedom to spend monies the way that they felt should be spent actually had better scores, actually had happier teachers because they were closer on the ground with things that were going on. So I don't know why this is a shock. I mean, the less bureaucracy, the better. But we're not seeing that in schools in general. And we're seeing more of a push toward trans and equity and things that have absolutely nothing to do with education. So I think that there's an overall problem in the state of Illinois and its schools to have this feeling of white people are bad and we need to teach our kids this, and we're getting completely away from the core subjects that are actually going to get our kids further ahead. Whether it's Chicago, whether it's a suburb, it really doesn't matter.
All right. So, what courses are being de-emphasized or delisted altogether that should be involved at the K through 6 level to get kids reading and doing math at grade level and being able to build upon those things as they make their way through school? What's happened? I know what's happened to the focus. It's on gender. It's on identitarian politics. But what should parents be arguing about what the school is doing in addition to that focus? Why aren't you doing phonics? Why aren't you doing spelling? Why aren't you doing handwriting? What are you suggesting would enhance literacy and literacy at grade level?
We focus too much on computers. Computers became the end-all, be-all. We needed to push everything toward technology. Teaching in a Catholic school, I mean, the Archdiocese, being there, we got rid of all textbooks and everything was put online. Kids don't learn that way. Especially young kids don't learn that way. They need to be able to actually have a physical book in front of them. They need to be able to go back and forth between pages. They don't need to be constantly in a darkened room looking at nothing but a computer screen, because they do that at home. School has to be separate from that. So we're not seeing that happening in our suburban, and now what will be happening in Chicago with that push. So you have the state of Illinois on one hand, who's now come out with all of their new tactics that are saying, gosh, we really need to have physical books in classrooms. We need to have each teacher with their own school library that are physical books, and yet we have a Brandon Johnson and we have many suburban schools that have completely gone the opposite direction of that, and everything is online. There are no physical books.
Well, what about at Catholic schools and private schools? Are there physical books there?
My personal Catholic school that I left, which was in Orland Hills, the principal at the time completely got rid of textbooks. We got rid of textbooks and everything was put online. And for COVID purposes, I guess that would have worked, but honestly, it didn't. Kids are savvy, and regardless of the age, they're more computer savvy than the teachers that are teaching, because we were never raised with computers. We weren't born with having an iPad or an iPhone in our hands. They were. So for COVID, for example, you'd have students that would show up to a class and they would be there for attendance, but then they would have taken a screenshot of themselves and post that for the rest of class. So you had no idea what they were doing with their time.
So
public schools.
So you taught for 30 years, right?
Yes.
When did you stop teaching?
Just a couple of years ago, actually.
So give us your review of what transpired in those 3 decades in terms of instruction, quality of learning, preparedness with the critical thinking skills that young people need to be successful at the collegiate level or the workforce.
Standards got lowered. Parents, when I started at the back of the yards, then I moved to Bronzeville. There are areas that were at that particular time, you're talking the 90s, they were depleted, as Mayor Johnson would say. They were depleted. The parents actually more in Hedges, which is where I started, back of the yards, it was Hispanic, and their parents were involved, but you had the problem of the bilingual, where I would have to have a student sitting beside me translating for me because the English wasn't there. Their child was first generation American. And sometimes you were lucky at the translation and sometimes you weren't. depending on if they were in trouble or they weren't. Um, when you went to Bronzeville, I was teaching with children who second grade were reading at a maybe kindergarten level. It was a special program that was started. We only had 17 kids uh, trying to raise their scores, but me being one of the only white teachers in a Bronzeville school, the parents initially were suspect. It took a couple years for them to understand I'm really with you, I'm not against you, but they didn't push education. And a lot of times, quite honestly, even if we were having after school, let's meet with the parents, let's meet with grandparents, who were oftentimes the ones that were taking care of their kids, it was their illiteracy. It was generational illiteracy. So a lot of the things that the state of Illinois is now pushing is for a literate household. Books on the shelves, reading to your kids. Well, that's great if you live in a suburb where the parent is at least high school educated and they can read a picture book to their children. But if you have generational literacy, you're not going to have that.
So in the suburbs, I mean, I understand that it's a vivid description of what's happening and what has been happening, but so why do you think that, like, some of those Tony suburban schools that have these reputations that I describe as no longer being warranted, the Downers Grove high schools, Naperville high schools, Barrington, they have reading at grade level scores below 70, some below 60. And I think
Yep.
that would shock people in those communities to learn that. So why do you think that is? That tests just got harder or something else is happening?
No, I don't. I personally, they're over testing kids, uh, giving them at least quarterly tests and then expecting them to jump for a state test at the end, toward the end of the year or in the spring. Uh, we're over testing, and that's part of the problem. And then they start tuning out. Another part of the problem is having these online companies like IXL where students have to bring their headphones and they listen to a text being read to them while they're supposedly reading along, and then they get a list of questions. They tune out. They tune out. It's not engaging. They're used to being on a computer screen as it is. So you're losing the teacher actually being the person that's engaging the student. And it's a tragedy to me because I didn't start out my teaching career that way, but over time you start seeing more and more of this technology that's coming in. And Common Core started that whole thing.
So I mean,
So,
essentially, what you're saying, it dulls the senses and de-animates their interest in learning.
correct. Because if all you're doing is you're spending 6 hours at school on a computer, and then you go home and you're playing video games, what's the point? There's no human interaction. So what's lacking to me is that teacher that is going to engage the way teachers used to do, where you would read chapter books aloud to kids and you would leave them at a cliffhanger so that the following day the kids couldn't wait until you continued reading the next chapter, regardless of the book. It's the teacher that's taking themselves out or being told to take themselves out. I don't honestly think that teachers really want this. They're being dictated that this is the way that this is going to go. So
Yeah.
they kind of deal with it as, oh gosh, this is going to be another thing that'll last for 2 years and then it'll be out the window. And the suburbs are notorious for going on bandwagons. And
Yeah, tell me about
spend
it. Yeah.
they spend the millions of dollars for a bandwagon program because a principal went off to some sort of workshop someplace, and we're going to buy into this, and they can because
It's
they've got the tax dollars to do it.
It's so funny
And then
too, because you're commoditizing this project, this product. You're commoditizing education for all the little special Johnny and Jennies all the special kids. To hear the parents talk about them, they're so bright, and then you commoditize this most important product.
Correct.
Amazing.
It's all who knows who. I mean, why on earth in the 90s were we using the Iowa state test? I mean, we live in Illinois. So what was the point? That
Better
somebody,
schools in Iowa. Yeah, maybe that was it.
Yeah, well, possibly, but when you're asking a second grade student about sculling, and you're in the inner city of Chicago, they have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
So unless the textbook is going along with the test that's being given, you're not actually what exactly are you testing? So there's a whole range of things, but suburban monies that are being used by the millions to get new textbooks or new programs, I will now call them because most of them don't use textbooks, new programs because this is going to be the bee's knees and it's going to raise our test scores, and they use it for a year, maybe two, and then it's scrapped. Let me give you an example. So my husband is an electrician. He's working in schools, and I volunteer at Project Hood. So the school was getting rid of perfectly good textbooks because everybody is moving over to being online, and they were just in piles. And I know Pastor Brooks, and I'm like, hey, I worked with you after school. I know that you're wanting to start your own boys' school eventually. The school is just dumping these books. Contact them and see if you can get a hold of them for free. If they're going to throw them out, why not just use them for your own purposes? They ended up throwing them out. And it's like, okay, so you're talking millions of dollars of textbooks.
Oh, and
If our kids can't
clogging
learn,
the landfill too, it's not very climate conscious of them.
if our kids can't learn, nobody learns. Nobody will learn. That's the pronouncement. Oh boy, it's not funny, but
the rationale for this, to me, is, I mean, we
can't make any. Can't make any look. Don't make anybody look bad. Don't make anybody look bad.
We can't have schools that are doing better than other schools because
Absolutely.
it's not equitable.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, let's all live in the dark. Erin Geary is a teacher for 30 years, as she was describing, writer, consultant, mother, wife, and volunteer. She writes at commonfolk365.substack.com, commonfolk365. Erin Geary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Do you really want to take shots the rest of your life just to lose weight? NJ Diet's typical results are twice as fast as weight loss injections without any of the side effects. Plus, you learn proper portion control and develop healthy eating habits for the rest of your life. By the end of NJ Diet's 40-day program, you will lose 20 to 40 plus pounds, contractually guaranteed. You will lose the weight and keep it off the natural way. NJ Diet uses your hair, saliva, and blood work, along with scans, to personalize natural solutions and supplements